Hello everyone, this is Harrison Galway, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to factor by grouping. So I have a few examples here that we can look at. You'll notice that this polynomial has 4 terms, and that's a sign that factoring by grouping might work as a technique to factor this polynomial. It's not a guarantee, but if you see 4 terms, you might want to try factoring by grouping. There's a good chance it might work for you. So the way we do this is we put the first 2 terms in parentheses and we put the second 2 terms in parentheses. And this is why the technique is called factoring by grouping. We're grouping up the first 2 terms and we're grouping up the second 2 terms. Our next step is to factor out the greatest common factor, or GCF, from both groups. So if we look at the first group, you'll notice that the greatest common factor here is going to be 2x squared. So we'll pull out 2x squared. And then what do we have left when we pulled that out? We have x plus 2. We'll do the same thing for the second group. The GCF for the second group, 3x plus 6, is 2. 3. So we'll pull out a 3, and we get x plus 2. And you'll see that the 2 things we have in parentheses here are the same, and that's the sign that the factoring by grouping technique was successful. If the 2 things you get in parentheses are the same, it worked. Our final answer is going to be one of the 2 factors will be the thing that appeared twice, the x plus 2. And the other factor will be the things on the outside here, that is 2x squared plus 3. And we're done. On to the next example. Again, we see that this polynomial has 4 terms, so grouping might work for us. So we'll group up the first 2 terms and we'll group up the second 2 terms. But notice that because there's a negative sign, or a subtraction symbol, in front of the third term, we need to put our parentheses around that subtraction sign. That's vital. If you don't do that, the technique won't work. And if you'd like, you can put a little plus sign between the 2 groups because technically they're being added, not multiplied. But anyway, we'll do the same thing we did before. What's the GCF of the first term? Or rather, the first group? Well, the GCF here is going to be 4x to the 4th. What do we have left? X squared minus 3. For the second terms, well, the GCF is 3, but we're going to actually do a lot better by pulling out a negative 3. Because if we do, what do we have left? X squared minus 3. And notice that allowed us to get the same thing twice in those parentheses. Our final answer, our first factor is the thing that appeared twice, x squared minus 3. Our second factor is the stuff on the outside, 4x to the 4th minus 3. And we're done. On to the next one. So here we see 4 terms. Let's try grouping, see if it works. We'll group the first 2 and we'll group the second 2 terms. What's our GCF of the first 2? That's going to be 2x squared. What do we have left? X plus 1. Well, the second group doesn't really have a GCF, but let's just pull out a 1, just so we have something out there. And of course, we'll still have x plus 1. Same thing appears twice, so it worked. Our 2 factors are that thing that appeared twice, x plus 1, and the stuff on the outside, 2x squared plus 1. Now for our next example, I included this example because I want you to see that factoring by grouping doesn't always work. Let me show you an example where it doesn't. We see 4 terms, so we give it a try. We group up the first 2, group up the second 2. Our GCF for the first is x cubed. What do we have left? X plus 2. Our GCF for the second group is x. What do we have left? X plus 4. But notice, we didn't get the same thing twice. And so this one is not factorable by grouping. The technique didn't work for us. Now, that's not to say that this polynomial that we begin with isn't factorable. It might be factorable by another technique like synthetic division, but you can't factor it by grouping. One more example. So 4 terms, let's try grouping. first group, second group. Notice I'm careful to put my parentheses around this subtraction sign and adding a little plus sign just as a formality. What's the GCF of the first two terms, or of the first group? Well, that's going to be 5x to the fourth. What do we have left? X minus 2. Again, while there's no GCF technically for the second group, we do really well to pull out a -1, because if we do, what's left is x minus 2, which is the same thing that we had before, right? So you want to be strategic about what you're trying to pull out in order to get those two things in parentheses to be the same. Our final answer is the thing that appeared twice, x minus 2, and the stuff on the outside, 5x to the fourth minus 1. One little thing to add. For all of these problems, assuming the instructions are to factor, you always want to check at the end to make sure that the problem isn't further factorable, that there's no other factoring techniques you can use. Now, for all the examples we did, there weren't any further factoring techniques you could use, but just a disclaimer, always check to make sure. So that's it, factoring by grouping. Thank you so much for watching, and please check out more of my videos. Take care.